Hello, my name is Father Tighe, and this is our 133rd segment of our Journey of Faith in the Light of the Cross, in which we begin chapter 23. And we go to the screen and we see our theme. Jesus redefines marriage and redeems celibacy and eunuchs, which explains the new definition of saints in Acts. The new saints are all the married without children, the celibates, the eunuchs, and parents who sacrifice together for the kingdom of heaven. We go to our next screen. We have to set the context for chapter 23. Matthew and Luke in 85, they're re-editing their texts, were aware of Paul's words on marriage, divorce, eunuchs, in Galatians, 1 Corinthians, about in the year 55 AD, 30 years before. Matthew and Luke dealt with divorce in the Gospels, but only Matthew had Jesus teach of eunuchs, which evolves into celibacy in the Gospel. Luke incarnates eunuchs and celibates in Acts by describing saints who spread the gospel to Gentiles. So he describes men, Stephen and the Ethiopian eunuch and St. Paul, rather than a theory of Jesus' teaching. We go back to Matthew 19 in light of our study of Acts. We go to our next screen and we see Matthew 19:3. The Pharisees asked to test Jesus, "Is it lawful for any man to divorce his wife for any cause whatsoever?" Jesus replied, "Have you not read that from the beginning he made them male and female? Thus a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Thus what God has yoked together, man must not separate." Now we go to our next screen. Then why did Moses command men to give a bill of divorce to dismiss a woman? He said, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because of your hard hearts. But this was not so from the beginning. I say, whoever dismisses his wife, except for porneia," that's a polluted marriage, not blessed by the rabbi or God, it never was a marriage, "and marries another, commits adultery." A big reason for Mosaic divorce was the wife could not bear children. If God abandons that woman, if she can't have children, then men can abandon. That was the thinking of the time. We go on to our next screen. 19:10. The disciples said to him, "If this is the Logos, this is your teaching about a man and a wife, it is better not to marry." He said, "Not everyone can accept this, except those to whom it has been given," which means God grace gives it to him as a gift. Now we got to go back and review. There was no room under the law for barren women or any sympathy for those who shirked their responsibility to build up Israel by having children. Jesus gives a new logos, a new teaching on eunuchs and celibates who give their life by heroic sacrifice to build up God's eternal family, which includes men faithful to barren wives. That is Peter. Okay, now we go on to our next screen. Jesus confirms Isaiah. God had not abandoned, but would redeem barren women and eunuchs. Judaic thinking is focused on power to give life. There is little concern for sexual satisfaction. So our society is obsessed with sexual fulfillment and satisfaction. They didn't even think in those terms. It's all about giving life. 19:12. For there are eunuchs who were born so from their mother's womb. So these are Jesus' words. There are eunuchs made so by men, the Ethiopian eunuch. There are eunuchs who made themselves so. This is celibates. This is not men who castrate themselves, but those who, for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, commit themselves. The one able to grasp this, let him grasp it, and this means Paul. He was the first one that saw it as a gift. We go on to our next screen. Stephan and Philip heroically sacrificed as saints. yet no indication of family responsibility. So we don't know their situation, but we knew they had no family responsibilities. The Ethiopian eunuch who cringed in silence before the shearer's blade, he can go back and evangelize in the Spirit in Ethiopia, which he couldn't do according to the Old Testament. Finally, Paul found evangelization so life-giving and so fulfilling, he believed that God had redeemed his cursed ailment and single life and transformed into a gift that freed him to dedicate his life to evangelization. Luke, these men lived out the new definition of the word saint, the holy ones. So we're emphasizing the word saint, and it means the holy ones, and this is how it all comes together. We go on to our next screen. We now review to get to know Peter better, so we understand better why he was a saint, or in what way he was a saint. All three synoptic gospels record Jesus entering Simon's house, where Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law of a fever. Now, Simon is Peter's real name, and Jesus transforms it into Peter. So when we say going to Simon's house, he's going into Peter's house, with no mention of Peter's wife. Now we question, was he a widower? Probably not. For in 55 AD, Paul writes, 1 Corinthians 9:5, do we not have the right to take a wife as the other apostles and Cephas? Cephas is the Aramaic word for rock, which we have Peter in Greek. This seems to say Peter traveled with his wife through Corinth. We go to our next screen. We can speculate that Peter was an effective symbol of life-giving oneness and saintliness, exactly because he had a painful marriage but would not exercise his Mosaic right to divorce his wife, and he refused to do this before he met Jesus. This is not just because of Jesus. He was faithful to her, like Zechariah was faithful to Elizabeth, the parents of John the Baptist. He was first pope because his marriage inspired family fidelity through heroic sacrifice in Christ. So Peter allowed God to redeem his curse. As Paul allowed God to redeem his curse, they both felt redeemed and very blessed by God. We go on to our next screen. After Jesus redefines marriage and eunuchs and what a saint is, parents bring their children to Jesus to bless. This is in 19, the end of chapter 19. They brought children to Jesus so he could lay his hands on them and pray. But the disciples stopped them. Jesus said, let the children come to me, do not stop them, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. We go to our next screen. The parents now saw Jesus as a celibate man. He wasn't married, he didn't have children, who radiated God's life-giving blessing on their sacrifices. So they saw him blessing them as parents and their sacrifices having children. Parents did not see a man in Jesus shirking his responsibility to have children of his own, nor a eunuch abandoned or rejected by God. This gives us God's new recipe of what the church is like. When those rejected and abandoned by law surrender their curse for God's purposes, then they become the saints of the church, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. We go on to our next screen. Jesus redefines marriage and redeems celibacy and eunuchs, which explains the new definition of saints in the Acts of the Apostles. The new saints are all the married without children, celibate people without children, eunuchs without children, and they join together with parents who sacrifice for the kingdom of heaven. Thank you so much for joining us for this 133rd segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross, and I hope you feel saints in your life doing wondrous things for your family. We are all
traveling in the footsteps of those that come before, and we'll all be reunited on that new and sunlit shore. Oh, when a saint go marching in, oh, when a saint go marching in, Lord, how I want to be in that number Here where the saints go, my